Here's my answer to 2B. How far do your chosen films demonstrate the importance of visual and soundtrack cues in influencing spectator response? Refer in detail to at least one sequence from each film. And this is also worth 40 marks. And here's my answer. Both films put a lot of stock in the importance of visual cues, perhaps more than soundtrack cues. Given that film is essentially a visual medium, this shouldn't strike anyone as particularly odd. No Country for Old Men in particular uses dialogue sparingly, since the focus and tension in most scenes builds through the physical body language and facial expressions between the characters. Having said that, what dialogue there is can be seen as quite important, since it is so sparse compared to most films, one can only assume greater significance when it occurs. By contrast, Boyhood places greater importance on soundtrack as well as visual cues in influencing spectator response. Unlike No Country for Old Men, which is largely devoid of music, Boyhood uses music far more during key moments to influence spectator response. An example of the importance of music from Boyhood would be the early scene wherein Mason, the boy main character, is riding his bike with a friend to spray paint an underpass. The music playing is a raucous rock song, The Hives' Hate to Say I Told You So, which underlines the youthful rebelliousness of Mason and his friend. This is important because it cues a more relaxed response from the spectator, since the use of rock music only underlines the casual nature of Mason's behaviour in the context of his vandalism, as being no more than typical of a young boy whose nature is to break, disfigure and destroy things without really thinking of why or thinking of the consequence. The overall impression is that we, as spectators, are just watching the natural behaviour of a young boy when left to his own devices, and we are not to judge him negatively for it. By contrast, the early scene in which Anton kills the policeman whom arrests him is a lot quieter and relies more on visual cues than on soundtrack cues, but that is not the same as saying that the soundtrack isn't just as important for the lack of it. Indeed, the sparseness of the soundtrack is what makes the scene more disturbing. There is no music to cue the emotions of the audience, but there is a focus on both the physical, the demonic intensity of Anton's face as he strangles the policeman, and the aural, the policeman's agonised choking. The scene begins with the policeman discussing the arrest with his superior on the phone. This actually is important as it offers a slight exposition in terms of the oxygen tank that the confused policeman mentions on the phone. Far more important, however, is that we can see behind the policeman so we can see what he can't, namely Anton moving the cuffs from behind his body to the front. Depending on the spectator, the cluelessness of the young yokel policeman on the phone in the foreground, as indicated by his wide-eyed bewilderment about finding some sort of oxygen tank for emphysema or something in Anton's possession, and dumbly calm yet melodically southern accent juxtaposed with Anton silently preparing to kill the young policeman in the background, is either disturbing or darkly amusing, or even a bit of both, depending on the sensibilities of any given member of the audience. The latter is most probable if the spectator is both clued into the dry, dark humour that runs throughout the work of the Coen brothers and, crucially, appreciates it. Regardless, the actual killing itself is rather disturbingly represented, since, as is common in a lot of Coen brothers films, violence is represented both suddenly and shockingly protracted. Equally disturbing is the scene in Boyhood where Mason comes home and finds Olivia on the floor of the garage. As Mason arrives home on his bike, he dismounts as he, and we the audience, hears his mother weeping. We don't know why yet, but it cues the emotions of the audience as we become apprehensive as to why she's crying. As the boys go around and into the garage, the camera pans round with them and we see Olivia on the floor of the garage. The gradual build-up of both aural and visual indicators of Olivia's distress also builds up the distress felt by the audience on Olivia's behalf on an empathetic level. But we are also fearful about how this was caused and what this means. It is significant that we only see from floor to waist level in terms of what's going on in the garage. The garage door is halfway down, because to a certain extent Olivia's distress is shielded from help from the outside world as a result. Mason's stepfather appears, but similar to the other characters except Olivia, we only see his legs and hear his voice. Visually, Olivia is the focus in the scene, as it is her pain that matters. Olivia screams at the boys to go into the house when the stepfather appears, and a disturbing realisation of what is happening begins to dawn on the audience. This is underlined further when the stepfather unconvincingly tells Mason that your mother had a little accident, now she's being dramatic. We as an audience can deduce through Olivia's frantic screaming when the stepfather appears that he assaulted her. This is further compounded by the stepfather's callous verbal account of what happened and the fact he doesn't go and help her up. Olivia keeps crying and tries to get off the floor, just as the stepfather gestures his arms towards her as he walks away, saying, "Get off the fucking floor, Olivia, for Christ's sake." The scene still does not cut away at this point, and for a few seconds we see Olivia still bent over in pain. This scene has a deliberately documentary-like realism, with only diegetic dialogue and no music. This only makes the scene all the more disturbing for its realism. The tension also rises in a later scene when the stepfather tries to find out where Olivia is and interrogates the children as to her whereabouts. The scene starts with an over-the-shoulder shot of the children sat on the sofa towards the camera in front of the stepfather. The stepfather demands to see their mobile phones to check for messages from Olivia. The silence between the dialogue between him and the children raises the tension, as we already know he is an angry and violent man, so as spectators we fear for the children's safety. As he finds out about the voice message on one of their phones, he asks the daughter what her mother said. When she responds not much, it cuts to a close-up of the stepfather asking again, and his face is intense and wide-eyed, which possibly indicates he's going to lose his temper and get violent with the girl. This is the first visual indication of the danger the children are in, and it is very disturbing for the spectator to see. It cuts to a close-up of the daughter looking down and shaking her head, before looking up and saying, "She said stay in your rooms, I'll be back later." We as an audience both respond with empathy and admiration for the girl, as she clearly finds the situation uncomfortable, as denoted in her dejected lowered head and shaking it gently from side to side, yet keeping herself composed as she raises her head and looks the stepfather in the eye whilst repeating the message clearly and calmly. The stepfather is clearly angry but doesn't harm any of the kids, only orders them to get in the car so they can find their mother. In both of the latter two scenes of threat analysed, the understated nature of visuals and or soundtrack paradoxically creates a heightened sense of disturbance in the audience. Likewise, the scene where Carla Jean arrives home from her mother's funeral to find Anton waiting in her bedroom is equally disturbing within the film of No Country for Old Men. As she opens the bedroom door, it quietly creaks open and we see Anton sitting waiting for her. Like other scenes in the film, the quiet is what adds to the tension for the spectator. It cuts to a reaction shot of Carla Jean, who looks confused as to who this man is, since the two have yet to cross paths in the film. There is dramatic irony here, since as spectators we already know who Anton is and know he is likely to kill her. This raises the tension considerably. Carla says, "I knew this wasn't done with," and we as an audience empathise with her plight, since she has lost both her husband and mother already. As she tells Anton her predicament, we see him sat emotionless in the shadows, and this only fills the audience with more dread, since we know this man is a sociopathic killer with no regard for innocent life. He quietly yet ominously tells her, "I wouldn't worry about it." This response is devoid of empathy or emotion, so we as spectators feel threat in his words. She says she needs to sit down, and there is a pause as if waiting for his permission. It cuts back to him, but he says nothing and just looks, smiling slightly. This quiet from him raises the tension of the scene, since he is as ambiguous as he has been throughout the film. It cuts back to a wide shot of Carla tentatively entering the room and sitting down. Her slow, quiet and deliberate movement only continues to heighten the tension felt by the audience. When she tells him that he's got no cause to hurt her, it cuts back to him as he calmly says, "No, but I gave my word." We as the audience know that Carla's husband was offered a choice by Anton earlier in the film. Either give himself up for death by Anton's hands, or else Carla would pay with her life. Given what we know about Anton, we know as spectators that we can only watch as Anton prepares to kill Carla. This makes the audience feel a sense of despair and helplessness, since no one can save Carla now. Anton informs Carla that her husband was offered the opportunity to save her, but instead he decided to save himself. The tone of Anton's voice is interesting here, as the inflection in his voice and the wideness of his eyes suggests a sense of pity on Carla as he says, "Your husband had the opportunity to save you, but instead he used you to try to save himself." It cuts to a reaction shot of Carla, whom is silent for a moment, but we can register the pain and hurt in her face, before she unconvincingly shakes her head and equally unconvincingly says, "It's not like that, not like you say." Deep down she knows her husband and knows he was too proud, even at the cost of her life, and we as an audience feel for her as a result. She says the same as Anton's other victims, "You don't have to do this." And then it cuts to a reaction shot of Anton gently smiling and shaking his head as he says, "People always say the same thing." We as spectators know this to be true, because we have seen Anton's other killings, and this only adds to the sense of despair, hopelessness and pity we feel for Carla. In conclusion, both films demonstrate the importance of visual and soundtrack cues in influencing spectator response differently, but both do so very well.